4 years ago, something terrible happened. Something weird happened in the whole world on earth. Can you guess what happened? Let me reduce the stress for you. COVID-19. COVID pandemic. Unforgettable moment, right? Everything changed. All the conventional things changed. Industries shut down. People's lives changed. Some for the worst. In short, everybody at first, their lives changed for the worst. Things were not normal, People that were working in the office started working at home. Children that were used to school, sessions were not active. Industries were reducing their workers. Everybody was shutting down, and the whole world was on lockdown. Nothing was normal again. Everything changed from there. It seemed like it was the end of the world, honestly. Remembering back then, 2020, it's like the world was about to end. I could remember how the markets, people were buying foodstuffs, people couldn't drive, people couldn't go anywhere, religious houses, mosques, churches, nothing, no gatherings. Oh my God. It's like the world was about to end. Now you imagine that as traders, or rather the people who trade on their laptop, the virtual reality people who trade, the forex traders, the crypto traders, the stock traders, you think that they are used to this kind of things, right? After all, we've always been on our laptops, not like we have an office that we go to where we all gather and all that, But even us, we are not exempted. In fact, the pandemic affected every aspect, and me included. Oh my God. I started thinking. I started doubting. I almost gave up because nothing was working. Every strategy, everything you knew before changed. Anything you knew before 2020 had to change. You don't have a choice than to change it for you to adapt. I wasn't exempted, but before that change came, like a lot of things happened, a lot of discouragements, a lot of traumas, depressions, What happened to me personally now was the fact that my strategy stopped working. Like a lot of things stopped working for me. I wasn't getting it, my trades, always hitting my stop loss, always wiping my account, and I'm like, what's happening? I couldn't figure out what was happening. Everything was not working. All the strategies I knew were not working. But then, I believe in every disappointment is a blessing. Just that blessing might not come and hug you. So you need to find your blessing in every disappointment and in every situation. And a lot of people after 2020, they realized that was their best years. That was when a lot of people made money. A lot of people understood their spouse, their partners, A lot of things, you get to understand yourself, get to learn new things. That's for people who were adaptive, and also they were ready to find that change, and also ready to find that blessing in disguise. Me included now. What changed for me? Trading. That was when I got to find zones. That was when I got to find how to trade zones, how to identify zones. And since then, it has been massive. Now, what is a zone? A zone is an area in a chart whereby buyers and sellers find an agreement. So, a zone is like a reversal area, a whole lot of area where either buyers are much there or sellers are much there, where they find agreement between each other. It's not even a battle, it's like an agreement. So it's a reversal point. Now, we have two types of zones, the supply zone and the demand zone. The supply zone is like the roof, and the demand zone is like the floor. So anytime a price keeps rising, and it got to a point upwards that it started falling down, it now came back rising, got to that same point and fell back. That point now turns into a supply zone. So supply zones are found above, where sellers are more than the buyers, and sellers have already had agreement with buyers that we are going to take this market downwards from here. And the demand zone is the opposite of the supply zone. Demand zone is like a floor. So price has been rising, has been dropping down, and it came to a point that the bulls took the market back up. It still came down to that same point, and the bulls took the market up. So that area becomes a demand zone. So it's a whole lot of area, not a point. And look at it like a roof and a floor. A supply is a roof and a demand is a floor. And how can you identify, or rather, how can you know that a zone is a zone? It's when price has been rejected at least twice. So for a price to like fall or rise from a certain area once, it's not enough. It has to be at least twice, at least 2 times. That's where you know that this is a zone. And examples of zones are, we have 2 major examples, or rather 2 examples of zones. We have the major zones and the minor zones. For where the major zones are normally found on the higher time frames, that's from the daily time frame to the weekly time frame to the monthly time frames. Now these major zones are much more effective because this is where the big ballers, the major controllers of the market, of the forex market are, which are the banks and the financial institutions. So if you can identify a zone from these higher time frames, which is the daily, weekly, monthly and yearly, then you are sorted. You know that you are following the major players in the market. And now the second example is the minor zones, which are found on the lower time frames, from the hourly time frames to the minutes time frame. That is from 4 hours or 8 hours to 1 hour, minutes, 30 minutes, 15 minutes. Now these are less effective because normally these are like retail traders that are mostly there, and it's not as effective as the major zones, as the major zones from the higher time frames. So looking back, finding zones, knowing how to trade supply and demand zones made trading much more easier, give me an edge, make me more confident in my analysis, and also reduced all the noises for me. Before then I was using a lot of indicators. I was using RSI, using moving averages, but trading with zones, like, it simplified charts for me. If I can identify these higher time frames, the major zones, major supply and demand zones, like, if I could just identify there, because at the end of the day, right, the world as a whole is all about supply and demand. For where there is demand, there will always be supply, and when the supply is much, it will fall back to demand. So you see that trading is not different. This is like people interacting, and when it comes to chart, as a retail trader, identifying the zones make you understand where these banks and financial institutions are. So looking back, 2020 came as a roller coaster, as a disappointment. But at the end of the day, it was a blessing in disguise, because if 2020 hadn't come, or the pandemic hadn't happened, I would still be using my support and resistance lines, using all those lines, So the major difference is that using all those lines will make you feel like it's just a point. But making use of zones will make you understand that it's a whole lot of area, especially if you're a price chart analyst, it's a whole lot of area. So when it comes to identifying zones, you are looking at it as a whole lot of area, not just a point. No, you can use a point as also a confluence, but you are looking at a whole lot of area, because price can be crazy. When I mean price action can be crazy, right? We all can agree to that, especially if you are trading or you are familiar with charts. So zones actually made it easier for me, made it lovely for me, and made me much more confident, and made me a professional trader, because zones adjusted me to the understanding of what the banks and financial institutions are really doing and where they are present, you know, from the higher time frames. Because when I want to identify a zone, I go to the higher time frames. I consider the higher time frames more. So you can see how blessed COVID came, even though it was a disappointment at first, but then it became a blessing in disguise for me in particular. Because if COVID didn't come, honestly, only God knows if I will be able to find what trading with zones, supply and demand zones were. Even though I know the word, but I didn't know how serious it was, you know. But since then, I started adjusting, and now I hope you are aware and you know what a zone is. When you hear zone, you know that we are talking of two zones, supply and demand, for where supply is like the roof and demand is like the floor. And we have examples which are the major and minor. The major zones are found on the higher time frames, and the minor zones are found on the lower time frames. As simple as that. So thank you for watching this video, and I hope it was helpful.